Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Success Shift. I'm very excited for today's episode because every now and again, when you do research or for those of you who are constantly learning and constantly growing, you kind of take in information from certain places, and then all of a sudden you kind of start to connect the dots. So you might have all these avenues of information, and then you start to do research and like, that's connected to that, and that makes sense as to why that helps that, and it just all kind of clicks into place. And for me, I've always found dopamine, which is what I'm going to talk about today, very, very interesting. And it actually did a lot of that. It clicked a lot of the, connected a lot of the dots. It had a lot of those like aha moments as I was finding out more information, doing some extra research. And it was really, really fascinating for me. So the reason I wanted to get into a lot of the brainwave and the neurochemistry stuff is because the more we can understand the brain and how we function and how we work and bring awareness to it, the more we can start to understand our behaviors and our habits and our patterns and all of the good stuff that comes along with it. So I think knowledge does become power, and knowledge about knowledge helps you reassess your situation and can help you handle situations in a better way, in a more informed way. So for me, I wanted to start to talk about a bit of the brainwaves last week and then more onto neurotransmitters. And the reason for that is because I really wanted to get into some of the dopamine, and I think it's good to have a bit of a back knowledge and a bit of information on where it comes from and what other things, neurotransmitters and that can do to the brain. So today I want to share some gratitude, gratitude for those that show up every morning onto this call. It's lovely to have people here and, smiling faces. I know for some of you it's very early. I also want to show gratitude to my lovely wife yet again. She's been taking on the son as he grows like crazy, looking after him more and more so that I can really keep on top of, the podcast episodes and the mindset courses that I'm creating and all the fun things that I'm able to do in order to help those here and those who are learning. My wife is doing so much in the background to allow me to have this sort of situation. So I'm very grateful for her today. And I'm just very grateful for knowledge in general. There's so many podcasts and professionals out there sharing their information. And it really just allows you to absorb things like a sponge and to take in so much and to constantly grow. It gives us that growth mindset. If you have that growth mindset, it makes it really easy to expand on that. So very grateful to those out there sharing the information, sharing their knowledge and sharing their time. For me, I love learning. So it's great. Right. So just reading the gratitude in the chats here. We've got some gratitude coming in. Grateful this morning for you, Jake, and all the information you give us and for your support. Thank you so much. It's really nice to always get gratitude for people is great. And when you have it and when you receive it, it really puts a big smile on my face. So thank you so much for that. I've been in a very lucky situation to have great support from mentors and stuff. I've just recently interviewed my mentor, Teresa, and it's grabbed a lot of attention and people, again, finding gratitude for me. And I would like to pass that on and find gratitude for her, for the situations and opportunities she's provided for me. So it's interesting when you receive gratitude, it kind of, for me anyway, it makes me want to give more gratitude to those around me. So thanks for sharing that this morning, Erin. Right. Dopamine, one of the neurotransmitters we were talking about last week. Dopamine, a very, very interesting drug, shall we say, or chemical or molecule, I suppose is the more correct term. What is dopamine? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is released into our through our neurons from a bunch of different things, mainly from an external stimuli or from a neighboring transmitter, as we learned last week. But what does dopamine do? So dopamine is usually known as the pleasure molecule. So we know about dopamine to provide pleasure. Now, I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail about the pleasure-pain balance and, what dopamine really is in relation to pleasure. But it's known as a pleasure molecule. And it also is based around our reward system and actually our motivation to do stuff. And this is what fascinates me the most about dopamine is its relativeness or its relationship to motivation. Dr. Andrew Huberman, I'll be quoting him a lot in this. He speaks a lot about dopamine, and I find him super fascinating. And the other person that I was listening to and reading up on, she's got a book called Dopamine Nation, which I haven't read yet. I'd love to read, but her name's Anna Lemke. So Those are the two people who I take a lot of my information from about this topic. And I think they're both very, very well versed in the topic, neuroscientists and authors. And so if you haven't heard of them, I definitely recommend going and listen to them. I can only probably share a fraction of the information they have on this topic. And believe me when I say it's incredibly important and to understand, and incredibly powerful to understand as well. But moving on. So dopamine, basically we have it from reward systems. And originally this was given to us for rewards like, okay, I'm hungry, I shall eat something. I'm thirsty, I shall drink something. These little rewards, these little dopamine hits, they promote our behaviors to continue doing something that's good for us. Now, on the very basic term, this is very important. We want to realize that, oh, hang on, my body's hungry. I need to go and fix that problem. I'm going to go chase down, grab some food. I'm going to eat that. And then I'm going to get this dopamine reward. I'm going to feel pleasure from it. And it's going to be great and satisfying. And hooray, we can do that again and we can survive. Now, the problem with this, as we see in today's society, and this is why social media, Facebook, Instagram, like, I'm not here to knock them, but this is the whole reason why they've blown up and they are so popular, is because of the dopamine reward system that we have. You jump on, you make a post, people start to like it. You get these micro doses of dopamine being released saying, good job, you did well. Let's crave that feeling again. You want to post a picture and it's like, oh, you look at this, more people liking it, more people sharing it. All this kind of interaction that happens at the snap of a finger, like multiple times, releases these little bits of dopamine. And so you start to have this craving towards that dopamine hit, and you start to have this craving towards the action that provides that dopamine hit. So posting on Instagram or, flicking through reels. I've been very guilty of it. Actually, it was one of the ones that, and I'll go into this, I wouldn't say it was addictive, but it was becoming addictive behavior where I'd sit there and I'd just scroll through Facebook reels. Now, don't get me wrong, I sort of tailored my reel stream to be informational and informative, and I really enjoyed it. But it's like 30 seconds and you just bang, something new, and you're getting this like constant feed of dopamine until it kind of depletes, and you've been sitting there for a couple of hours and like, why am I even scrolling through this? Like, what am I doing? I got to get up and change, right? This is that kind of depletion system. So we get the dopamine hit, and then the next one we do is just a little bit less and a little bit less. And this is kind of how addictive behavior happens, especially with drugs. So drugs, they provide a dopamine hit, which is greater than any kind of natural dopamine hit that we can get. And then we try to find that dopamine hit again. And unfortunately, nothing can provide that except for the drugs. So you go back to the drugs, which provide the dopamine hit, and then you want that dopamine hit again. And this cycle continues until you sort of have this. And this is Andrew Huberman's term for it, which I thought was absolutely incredible. Addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. And so he talks about the concept of addiction being like, okay, the only thing that's going to be giving me pleasure now is this one thing. And usually that's where the drug or whatever behavior, yes, you can be addicted to drugs and behaviors. That's the only thing that brings you pleasure. And so I find this neurotransmitter extremely interesting because it has such an impact on a lot of our daily life. And if we understand it to a better dynamic or a better level, we can utilize this to tap into the power of dopamine and use it to progress with things. So one of the things that Andrew Huberman talks about is milestoning. And this is that concept of you're getting a little bit of a dopamine hit by achieving the reward for achieving the goal. And if you set these little milestones, like I know for me when I was jogging, and I didn't even realize I was doing this, but now that I'm hearing about this, this is exactly what I was doing. I'd jog, I'd get 4, 5, 6 Ks in, and I'd start to get tired. And I'm like, okay, I need to then just keep pushing until I get to that lamppost up there. And then when I get to that lamppost, then I can slow down a little bit. And then that's my goal. I take my mind off it a little bit. I'm just like, that's my goal. I'm going to run to it. My mind goes somewhere else. I hit that and I'm like, oh, feel energetic. I'm like, okay, let's just make it to the stairs now. I can make it to the stairs. And then I'd run, get to the stairs. And then the same thing would happen. And I'd find that I just keep like this level would just keep getting further and further. And apparently on a chemical basics, what's happening is that when I hit that milestone, when I hit that level, this release of dopamine is happening. And then the body has a way of turning this dopamine into neuroepinephrine, I believe. And then neuroadrenaline. And that gives you the energy to keep going. And this kind of system happens over and over again. And this is where you hear those crazy stories of, war people who crawled for miles without legs, or people like Andrew Goggins, I believe it is. Is it? It's not Andrew Goggins. I think it's Andrew Goggins. Or David Goggins, I think. Sorry, who had to run 24 hours, run this marathon, and he ended up having like blisters all over him and tore his Achilles, but kept on running and had this like crazy amounts of resilience and determination because of this milestoning. How far have I got to go? I'm just going to get 1K at a time, and just having the ability to allow the chemicals to produce this system that just keeps you going. So super fascinating stuff. But one thing that I learned more so from Anna was more about this pain-pleasure balance. And this is exactly kind of how the dopamine works. So when you have, let's say, I think the example that I heard was chocolate. You have a little bit of chocolate, it feels good, it tastes good. And this brings the balance of the scale. So pain, there's the same part of the brain that runs the pain and pleasure, and it's like a scale. And so it kind of teeters to one direction or the other. And when you have the chocolate, you teeter to the pleasure. And you're like, oh, yes, this feels good. But then you have what's known as, what was it? What was the term she used? So give me 1 second here. There's, okay, I can't find the term that she used. I did write it down, but these kind of like neurogremlins, I think she referred to them as. And the point here is that they will jump on the other end to balance it out. And so you have the pain, the pleasure coming down, and then you have these neurogremlins jumping on the other side, which weigh it down to make it equilibrium, because human bodies, we want homeostasis, and we want to be in this like physiological equilibrium. And so when we have this pleasure input, we need something to balance it out. And this is these neurogremlins, the best thing I can refer to it as, because I can't think of the other reference. But the problem with this is that the dopamine, it runs out much faster than these neurogremlins. And what happens is when the dopamine depletes, we're left with a weight on our pain side. And then we have, for a while, we are down on the pain side, and we're not sure why. Now, this is what people refer to as the come down. It's the hangover with alcohol. It's this really like lull feeling after a super busy high. If you've just achieved something you've been working to for ages, you have this bit of a come down and you're feeling a bit flat. And that's because of this pain pleasure kind of balance. But what we can do, and this is what I really loved the term she said, get your dopamine indirectly by paying for it up front. And what this means is we want to do something that has pain related to it in a sense, so that we can get the dopamine release afterwards. So just like when we put some dopamine in, the neurogremlins sort of jump onto the pain side and weigh it down. If we do something that's painful, then we have the neurogremlins jumping onto the pleasure side. And then when the pain's gone, the pleasure side is actually weighed down. And so we're kind of releasing dopamine and doing all these things that last for a long time. And now what would you refer to as a painful thing? This is something like going to the gym. Most people don't like going to the gym when you first start. It's an effort thing that you have to do, but you go to the gym, you pump your weights, the endorphins are released, and you have this pleasure for a long time afterwards. Same thing with like ice baths, for example. Ice baths, you jump in, it's painful. Or cold showers, you jump in, it's painful for the first few minutes, but then you jump out and you have this long release of dopamine, which is pleasurable. And there was research done in a study that showed that the dopamine, I think this was somewhere in Europe, I can't remember exactly where, some university in Europe, that would do the study with people jumping into ice baths and found that the dopamine release was up to 250% higher than baseline and lasted for 2.5 hours after they had their cold shower or their cold plunge. And so what you're doing is you're putting yourself through a bit of pain first in order to get a long depletion, slow release of very high levels of the pleasure that comes afterwards. And I found that extremely fascinating. And so the psychology that I use for myself now, and since I've been doing this for the last kind of week, I'm like, is this causing me pleasure? Like if I want to do something, is this pleasurable to start, which will cause me pain later, i.e. eating unhealthy stuff, which I know is not going to be good for me, or turning on the movie instead of reading a book where I know that I'm just going to turn my mind off and I'm just going to feel lazy and I'll have, blue light in my eye till late, and so I won't sleep well? Or is this going to be painful for me where I'm actually going to get the pleasure later? Like is this going for a jog? Is this actually going to be a hassle? Yeah, it is. So what does that mean? It means I'm going to get the pleasure later. Sweet, let's do it anyway. I can endure 5-10 minutes, and then I'll have the few hours of the pleasure. And so it's just reversing the general thought patterns we have towards our certain behaviors. Now, how can I relate this back to trading? Well, how often do you find that you have gone, maybe jumped on the charts, and we spoke about this yesterday in the trading call, jumped on the charts, seen a situation and just hit the button, be like, yeah, this is pretty much close to it. I'm just going to hit the button. And you don't go through the process. You don't read, you don't go through your trading plan. You don't do your brain warm up. And then most of the time, that trade doesn't go your way. Well, I think the problem is lots of the time, and I want to talk more into this in depth in another episode about kind of a term that I'm using, that I'm making up, called trading trauma, where we have this kind of negative relationship with trading, in the sense that we jump into trades that are completely random and then they take off and you get this huge win and it feels great. And you're like, yes, why would I go through all the effort of doing my trading plan and stuff when I can just go with my flow, hit the button and get these big wins? And this kind of behavior, this jumping the gun, this instantaneous pleasure from just like absolutely nothing, is kind of giving us this falsified reward system, which gives us this like traumatic, like this trauma almost towards trading, where we go, yeah, I know that I can make money really easy because I've seen this in the past. I'm just going to bang. I didn't go through on my trading plan. I didn't go through the process. Me saying no to entering this trade is painful, but you know what? The more I do this, then the more I'm going to appreciate when my actual trade setup comes, and it's going to be 10 times better than taking myself out. Like, I'm going to enter this trade because I'm worried I might miss out. Oh, it didn't work. I'm going to enter this trade. Oh, it didn't work. So you're feeding that instantaneous pleasure with the emotions that are coming up, but that doesn't work out. And in the long run, you end up doing trading for 2-3 years and you're like, why haven't I made any progress? However, if we switch this around and go, there is a trade here, but you know what? I'm going to fight this. It's going to be painful, but I'm going to let it go. And if it takes off, that's okay. I can deal with it. And we're going to do this over and over again until this, you know what? This is a 10 out of 10 trade for me. I'm going to take it and see what happens. And then we can take the pleasure when you know what? I actually followed my trading plan. I did everything I could and I'm getting rewarded for it. Or I did everything I could. You know what? This one didn't work out. Maybe I can tinker it. And then over time, the more discipline you get, the more fine tune you get on your trading plan, the more pleasure you're going to get and the more pride you're going to have when you've actually made it to that success level, rather than having this falsified hope that keeps getting depleted because you're not actually doing anything really in a consistent manner. Okay. So going back to this idea of dopamine and being the reward system and the motivator rather than the pleasure system, there was an experiment done. It's called the rat experiment. Well, I don't know if that's the actual name for it, but I'm calling it the rat experiment, where these scientists got these 2 rats and they actually gave them food. They stuck some dopamine. They made a way of putting dopamine into the brain for the rat every time they ate. And so the rat was getting pleasure from the eating. But then what they did was they took another rat and they depleted the dopamine. And so what would happen? They thought that the rat wouldn't get pleasure from eating and they would stop eating. But what actually happened was the rat would keep eating and it was still managing to get pleasure from the food it was eating. Then what they did was they actually moved the rat a little bit further away from the lever. So they had access to the food, they pulled the lever, they got the food, they ate it. Then what they did when they realized that even without dopamine, he was still pulling the food and eating it, getting the pleasure, they moved it further away. And so now the rat with the dopamine actually moved, a meter, or not a meter, a half a meter, rat's length, to hit the button to get the food. But the rat without the dopamine had no motivation to do it. And so even that tiny movement of half a rat's length was enough to stop the other rat from actually taking the cheese. And so what we learned from this was that dopamine, while being regarded as the reward neurotransmitter, it was actually more of the motivator that was creating the motion for them to get up and do something. And so you're still able to find pleasure. And that's the problem with, the social media thing and our modern day technology. You've got porn at the touch of a button. You've got social media scrolling. You've got junk food, all these things that are instantaneous pleasures that are giving you that dopamine hit. but are not good for us in the long run. And we've just got them at the snap of a finger. And so we're not actually having the motivation to work for anything or to go out and strive and get anything. And what dopamine does is that is our motivator. That's the thing that we use to go, hang on, that reward was great. I liked it so much that I'm going to get up and actually put effort into achieving it again. And so if we can shift our mindset from the dopamine from being a pleasure drug to our motivator and using milestones to incrementally increase our motivation. So yes, you know what? I did good work. I actually finished something. I can be proud of that. Dopamine helps me move forward and do it again. This is the key to understanding, the neurotransmitters in our brain, I think. And so I found it super fascinating that with the rat experiment, we were able to understand that dopamine was now used as a motivator. Okay. So I think this was also Andrew Huberman that said, the problem is not pleasures. The problem is that pleasure experienced without any prior requirement for pursuit is terrible for us. And we have that so often these days. So those who are going to become successful are going to be those people who can create their own internal buffers for pleasure. And so not fighting, not giving in to the instantaneous pleasures, having the willpower and the discipline to buffer yourself from the instantaneous pleasures. This is what's going to be the key to allowing you that long-term success, because you're going to find pleasure in the discipline. You're going to find pleasure in your ability to hold off and to refrain. And this is going to give you better, longer pleasure in the long run. Okay. And so it's about where our mindset's at and how we're going to find the discipline and the willpower to say no to the instantaneous pleasures that give us long-term, that give us short-term satisfaction, and yes to the instantaneous short-term pains that give us long-term satisfaction. Okay, I hope that's making sense. Now, to part two of the quote from Cumin about addiction is he goes on to say, a good life is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. And so I love this, where a good life truly is your ability to find pleasure in all of the things. The more and more things and the smaller things you can find pleasure in, the better your life is. If you can find pleasure in drinking water during the day, you're going to have a great life. If those little things, and this comes down to gratitude, which is why I say this every single morning, the more things we can find gratitude for, the more things and experiences that we can actually find pleasure in, the better our life's going to be. And if you have the ability to find pleasure and happiness and joy in a huge array of things, even the smallest things, then your life is going to be filled with happy, joyous times, right? And so a good life is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. I really, really love this quote. Okay. So with this, I want you to think about a few things. I want you to think about where does your discipline hold? Where is your willpower? What are the things that you can say no to? Are you one to give in very, very quickly and easily? What's your motivation like? What things do you find pleasure in that you can use as little reward systems to help you along your goals, along your big term goals? What milestones can you reach? And now, on that, I was just talking before this call with someone, and the whole pain pleasure system is absolutely incredible. And understanding the pursuit is the reward. And if we can really realign ourselves with finding pleasure in the journey, that lovely saying that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Well, that's because if we can find joys in the struggles or in the challenges, then you become unstoppable. I think Tom Bilyeu talks about this, where if you can find pleasure in the challenges that you face on your journey, you will become unstoppable, because those challenges are actually the things that bring you joy. And it's funny, so just to finish off, you can see that in a very extreme way in some of again, some old experiments, electroshock experiments, where people get shocked, which is painful, and then they keep increasing that shock, which increases the pain. But then when they get taken back to a very small shock that's nowhere near what they're used to now, that actually brings pleasure, because it's so little in comparison to the pain that they were feeling at one point. And so, the more you endure, the more hardship you go through, then you can actually find pleasure in the things that you at one point in your life found extremely, extremely painful. And I mean, if you take it to the extreme level, this is where you get, masochistic fetishes and stuff like that from people who have gone through something so much that at small degrees, they're now getting pleasure from it. And I think if you can take this concept, not that level, you can actually find ways to push through struggles to a point where the everyday struggle, which some people may find it almost crippling or impossible to do, you actually find joy in, and you can actually continue to do that day in, day out, and reach all kinds of levels of success. And so there's so much more I could talk about on dopamine, and really it expands into so many different levels. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I'm going to have to find a way to cultivate this into another episode and find a way to really bring that round full circle with, that trading trauma that I was talking about, because unfortunately I wasn't able to bring it back in time. But with that, let's go jump over to the call. Let's go jump over and start trading. So to the people on the podcast, I will speak to you soon. To my traders, jump over, make sure you read through your trading journal, make sure you read through all of your mindset, your trading plan, all of the above. Make sure that you've done your brain warm up, make sure that you've got in the right headspace, and give yourself the time to, really understand yourself and your behaviors on the charts, so we can start to get some long-term profitable gains. All right. Much love, everyone. Speak soon. Bye.